Hi guys, welcome to the Facebook training tonight on how to overcome burnout, feeling stuck and overwhelmed so that you can feel absolute clarity, confidence and peace of mind. So this evening we're going to be going over how to connect to your why to be able to commit to change, how your attachment styles and inner child wounds trigger your stress, and how to recognize stress in your body so that you can calm that down. Last but not least, I also want to sort of take you through a little bit of a mini action plan to reduce overwhelm and feeling stuck. Now, for those of you who stick around to the end of the video, there's going to be a gift worth $297. So tag a friend in the comments to help this reach more people. And perhaps, if there's someone that you know who's suffering from burnout, tag them in as well. So if you don't already know, and we'll just get started, if you don't already know, burnout is caused from high levels of stress, and in this day and age, it's through what you perceive as stressful. So things like deadlines, paying bills, cleaning the house. Mostly, it's not what our stress response is or should be used for. Our stress response should be used for imminent danger. It was designed for us to be alerted for imminent danger for survival. So burnout affects every part of your life, whether it be your relationships, whether it be your career, or your health. And it's something that creeps up on you over an extended period of time where, we're consistently perceiving stress, and it can vary the different levels of stress, and especially if it's acute stress. So a little bit about myself, I'm a burnout recovery coach, but I also do past life regression, Hawaiian massage, I'm a Reiki master, and I do access bars as well. I wanted to sort of shine a little bit of a light because I've actually been through burnout, I've experienced it, and that kind of kicked off for me around 5 years ago when I separated from a 10-year relationship from the father of my children. At the time, my son was only about 6 months old. And that child, he never slept. He didn't sleep. He was awake 3 to 6 times in the evening, which was a real shock to the system actually, because my daughter was quite the opposite. She slept like 12 hours a night from 4 months old. She was super happy, never whinged, never cried, just a delightful, easy baby. So at that time, she was just starting school when all of this went down. And the state that I was in, I was just absolutely riddled with anxiety. I was wondering, how was I going to cope running my business so sleep deprived? How was I going to cope financially on my own and provide the life that I truly wanted? How was I going to keep it together and be that present mum that I wanted to be? Because at that point in time, my mental, emotional and physical health was in complete disarray. However, I was in a luckier position than most other people. Being a holistic life coach and body and energy worker, I knew the tools that I needed to implement, but I just wasn't applying it to my life. I was barely putting one foot in front of the other just to get through the daily grind. And, I'd wake up completely filled with dread about facing the day, but, I knew something kind of had to give, otherwise it was going to be my children who suffered significantly from, having a disconnected, a stressed out, overwhelmed, shitty mum. And I was completely aware of the vicious cycle. I'd be drained 99% of the time with no energy, and then I'd become resentful if I had to clean up after the kids, if they made a mess, because I didn't have the energy. And that's what caused me to become obviously irritable. When you don't have energy, you're tired, you're lethargic, and then you'd sort of start snapping. And I'd start snapping at my children at the littlest things, like having to read a book to them at night time, or if they're nagging me that they want to go scooting or to the park. But, kids, they're just being kids. That's what they want. They wanted their mum. They wanted love, they wanted attention, and that's where they thrive. But I was so strung out, exhausted, with absolutely nothing to give, that I'd snap. And then after you snap, that treacherous sort of mummy guilt would plague me for that night. And then you'd go to bed feeling like shit. And then you'd wake up the next morning and the cycle would start all over again. So I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about, especially if you're a mum and especially if you're burnt out. I kind of had a bit of a realization when one day I was sitting down, I was scrolling through social media. After school pickup, I'd pick them up. Kids were running amok and I'm on my phone just scrolling, as you do when you're burnt out, and as you do anyway, if you become a little bit avoidant. And a meme came up that completely struck a chord in me. And it said, "You're only one decision away from a completely different life." And when I read that, it was just like a black plain meme with white writing. And it just completely struck a chord in me. And it was in that moment that I was like, yeah, something's got to change. And that's when I made that decision that I wanted to, create that change. I wanted to make that decision to create that change and make a plan and then follow it through. So that's exactly what I did. But being a coach, I knew that I needed to start with my why. And for me, my why were my children. Now, your why is really quite a crucial part of deciding and then following through. It needs to be bigger than yourself. It needs to have a strong enough emotional pull to pull you through states of doubt, to pull you through states of fear, and low motivation. Because it's going to be like being burnt out. You don't have any of those things, but you need to have a really big why you have to pull yourself out of that state. So it needs to be bigger than yourself. And for myself, my why was creating a life of freedom for my children and myself. I wanted to have choices in life. If they wanted to do extracurricular activities, I wanted to be able to do that for them. I wanted to put them in good schools. I wanted to provide a beautiful, stable home. But mostly, I wanted to have a really deep connection with them and a meaningful, close relationship. I wanted to be present and connected to my kids so that they knew that no matter what, I was ready and able to be there for them, in any way that they needed, whether that be emotionally, financially, or otherwise. So when you're deciding to sort of, make a change, you need a little bit of a vision of what you want to achieve. Then you've got your why that's going to help you pull you through the hard times. Why do you want to achieve it? What would life look like when you're, fulfilling life at your fullest potential? And who's it going to benefit? Who's going to benefit from your journey of reaching your fullest potential? So to put it simply, connecting with your why is having a reason with an emotional pull that's bigger than you, that's big enough for you to be disciplined and big enough for you to find motivation to get through the hard times. So once you have your why, you need to then be aware of the state you're in. Okay, how painful is it? What is it preventing you from doing? What's it costing you? I can definitely tell you that burnout is costing you quality of time with your children and your loved ones or your partner. It's costing you money for sure by not being able to reach your full potential at work, to get that promotion. And it's definitely costing you your health, which we all know if you don't have your health, then you're on the fast track to an early grave. So with all that said and done, I think a common question a lot of people ask themselves is, well, why am I the way that I am? Why do I react the way that I react? Well, why do I let things bother me so much? Or why do things bother me so much and then I explode and react in a certain way? I can tell you now that all of those things lead back to your conditioning as a child and to your attachment style. So this was another topic that I kind of wanted to go into and delve into is attachment styles. So we were seeded, attachment styles are where the seed of your perceived stresses are created. the wounds and past experiences of your inner child hold on to these, and they recall moments of unsafety from the subconscious mind, and further, they're reinforced further through similar experiences that you have as a teenager to then in adulthood. They will continue to feel unsafe until these wounds are brought to the surface with awareness and resolved and healed. But the first step is awareness. That A, that they exist within you, and B, that they are one of the main contributors to your perceived stresses. So what is an attachment style? So when we're born, we're wired to attach to our primary caregivers. And further into our lives, we attach to other relationships that mirror that first connection with our caregiver. So other relationships such as friendships, such as colleagues, love relationships, and specifically also as well, the relationships that we hold and have with our children. So how we show up in our relationships now was learnt from our caregivers through what they modeled to us. And one thing that I really want to point out to, and for everyone to remember, is our caregivers or our parents, they're only human too. They had their own unresolved trauma, and they did the best with what they could with what they knew. However, without awareness, we can go on to either repeat their attachment style or we'll grow up to repel it. And that it's important to understand that we will generally pass this modeled way of being to our children. So our first attachment, in our first attachment with our caregivers, we learn how to interact emotionally and how to communicate, how to cope with our environment, and how we cope and manage stress. So there's 4 main styles of attachment, and they have some have more prominent wounds for each style. And I'll kind of go through that in this bit here. So you may find that you fall into maybe 1 or 2 attachment styles, and generally you'll be like, that sounds like my mom. Yeah, that kind of sounds like my dad. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a mix between the 2. So the first attachment style that I'm going to be talking about is secure attachment. And if you're on the healing journey, this is the ultimate style that you're looking to get to. And it is possible through awareness and resolving the wounds. We can all get to this secure attachment through reparenting the inner child. So the first one is called secure attachment. So parents with a secure attachment, they're able to tolerate stress. They can regulate their own emotions, and they're attuned to their child's emotions and are able and willing to meet all of their needs, where the children will feel heard, feel seen, and feel loved and understood. So as an example, regardless of if the child, say, is having a bit of a tantrum, the parent is able to hold space for that child when it's screaming and crying without being emotionally reactive. They're remaining calm throughout this whole process. So this teaches the child that even though they're losing it, the parent is a safe space, and it models to the child how emotional regulation is held. Now, emotional regulation is a skill that's learnt. There is no such thing as self-soothing. I don't give a shit who you are and what you think in terms of self-soothing and leaving a child to cry and cry and cry and cry and cry, that then they eventually fall asleep. That's actually creating trauma of abandonment within a child from a really super young age. There is no such thing as self-soothing. It's just that they've learned over a period of time that they're not going to be their need isn't going to be met, and they eventually just collapse of exhaustion and fall asleep. So with children of parents who could provide a secure attachment, they are secure with time alone. When they're eventually getting older, they become secure with time alone. They're able to navigate and communicate their emotions effectively and constructively. And as adults, They show up as quite responsive, engaged, empathetic, and responsible. Now, the belief system, the general gist of a belief system of somebody who has a secure attachment is that they feel like they are worthy of love. They feel like they're capable of getting the love and support that they need, and they believe that others are willing and able to support them because they've had that secure attachment and they've learned that from their parents, through their parents having emotional regulation and holding space for them. Now, someone with a secure attachment, there's going to be some, there's no perfect parent out there. I just want to put that out there. There is no perfect parent out there. However, if you can teach your child emotional regulation and hold space for them during those early years, you're going to have a child who has a nurtured inner child. That means that they're going to show up as being trusting adults. They're going to be stable and secure on their own. They're not going to have issues and feeling codependent. They feel competent in their own ability. They're going to feel a developed sense of self. They're going to have a general positive outlook on life. They're going to be complimentary of themselves, so they're going to love themselves, and they're going to be super complimentary of other people as well. They accept themselves, and they can generally be quite thick-skinned. And they know that whenever something is going, like there's a bit of an altercation or something going on with somebody, you just say if you're at a supermarket and you're stepping in line and they feel like you've pushed in, they're not going to take that situation personally. If ever there's like a bit of a confrontation or a blow up out of nowhere, they're going to have the knowledge that there's something going on for that person. I'm not going to take this personally. They do that automatically because they have this secure attachment. They've got strong boundaries with themselves and with others, but they can also be flexible, playful, and creative. When you've got a secure attachment, you can voice your emotions quite easily and you can show vulnerability. You're able to meet your own needs. You don't look for others to meet your needs. You know that you can meet your own needs and you can regulate your own emotions. Now, predominantly, they're very premeditated in their actions. They think before they do things, and they can consciously respond. So that is your secure attachment. Insecure, anxious is our next sort of category. So parents who are insecure, insecure, anxious children, they're like misattuned to their child's needs. So they're responding depending on their own mood first. So if mum's in a shitty mood, she's stressed out for whatever reason, she's got a stressful environment, if she's in that mood, she finds it hard to be able to meet the emotional, physical, mental needs of the child. So therefore, we perceive her as being unpredictable and inconsistent in showing love. And they're only able to meet the child's needs some of the time due to their own inability to deal with their own emotions or their stressful environment. So when they're in a good mood, mum is all there. She's loving, she's caring, she's like super attentive. But if she's got stuff going on and she's quite stressed out, then she finds it hard to cope with the added stress of having to meet the needs of the child. She's unable to put her stuff aside and hold space for the little one. So as adults, children in this category, they have a tendency to override their own physical and emotional needs to gain love and attention from others. And this could, like I said, this could be in that relationship with mum and child. They'll put their own emotional needs. They'll learn that when mum's in a bad mood or dad's in a bad mood or grandma, whoever it is that they're around, that's around them often, they've learned to steer clear, that environment isn't safe and that their needs aren't going to be met. So they've learnt to put their own feelings, whether it be physical or emotional, on the back burner. So that also then develops into people who then become people pleasers. They have a tendency to show up also when they're stressed as controlling, erratic. They tend to blame, and they also themselves, they tend to be a little bit unpredictable. And you'll find that those will be the kinds of traits and behaviours of the parent as well. So children who have grown up with insecure attachment as adults, their belief systems sort of sit around the whole, like, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not capable of getting the love that I need without being angry or clingy, and others are capable of meeting my needs but might not want to because of my flaws. That's their belief systems that they start to develop when they've grown up in that environment. So the inner child wounds of an insecure, anxious person is that they're mistrusting because of that whole unpredictable behavior from the caregiver. They lack self-worth. They are constantly seeking approval and validation. They're critical of themselves, but they're complimentary of others. In terms of boundaries, they tend to have blurred boundaries. They allow relationships to have blurred boundaries, and they're unrealistic with their boundaries. And self-betrayal is quite prevalent in this particular attachment. So they can be impulsive and reactive, and they're also quite needy, and they need excessive intimacy, whether it be emotional intimacy in terms of like constantly needing to be reassured. So that is the insecure, anxious category. The next one is insecure avoidant. So parents who produce insecure avoidant or create children who have insecure avoidant attachments, they're somewhat disconnected to some degree from like a physical or emotional connection, and they can be dismissive, leaving the child to navigate emotions alone. So I feel like a lot of men who have been shut down possibly by their dad or their mum, because of today's society, that men have this whole like, or boys are sort of told, suck it up, buttercup, toughen up, get over it. I find a lot of men can be in this particular category. So as children who are in the insecure avoidant category, there's a little bit of a disconnect between their inner emotions and their outward behavior. They tend to pretend that they're okay when they're not, and they're less sensitive to the social and emotional needs of others. And that's because that's what's been displayed to them by the caregiver. They're dismissive. The caregiver has been dismissive, so they themselves become that way. And they can show up as critical, they can show up as being quite rigid, very intolerant and distant, and they keep their emotional distress internal to themselves without expressing with matching behavior. So they're going to be constantly walking around with a bit of a facade on, making out that everything's all good. They don't express how they emotionally feel, but on the inside they're feeling hollow and they're feeling quite alone, but they don't express it and they won't show you in their behavior. So their belief systems, sort of growing up with this type of attachment, is that they'll feel like, I am worthy of love, I am capable of getting love and support, but I can get that from myself. They've learnt not to depend on others to give them that because of that dismissive behavior. They'll think to themselves that others are unwilling or incapable of loving me, and others are not trustworthy and they're unreliable when it comes to meeting my needs. So the inner child wounds of an insecure avoidant would be someone who's very self-assured because they've learnt to be quite independent. They're mistrusting of others. They're fiercely independent. They suppress their emotions. They're complimentary of themselves, so they tend to have a little bit of a bigger ego, but they're very critical of others. They have strong boundaries with others, but they lack discipline and control within themselves in terms of boundaries. They're uncomfortable with intimacy, and they can have a little bit of a sense of entitlement. So this is the insecure avoidant. The fourth type of attachment is called insecure disorganized. So caregivers of this category would be some or all of the following combinations. So they may have been neglectful, they may have been depressed, they may have been traumatized themselves or abusive. And with the child growing up in this environment, the child is constantly feeling unsafe to get close to their carer. But however, they're completely dependent on the carer because they are under their roof, and they're unable to leave the environment because they're small, they're children. So they don't feel like they can build a connection. They don't feel safe to build a connection. They're also unable to leave the environment that feels unsafe. So as adults, children who experience these are unable to distinguish the difference between what is safe and what is dangerous. They're not capable of regulating their emotions, and when they get stressed, they can show up as quite explosive. They can be a little bit chaotic, abusive in some sense, and also untrusting. So if you've grown up in this kind of environment, their belief system is wired to think that they're not worthy of love, they're not capable of getting love that they need, they can't trust anyone to love them without hurting them, they don't know if they can love someone in case they hurt them, and they don't think that others can meet their needs, and others are not trustworthy or reliable. And unfortunately for these people, when they experience abuse, to some degree they believe that they deserve it. So someone with the inner child wounds of the insecure, disorganized person is that they've got low self-esteem, they're very dependent, they mistrust themselves and they mistrust others. They actually expect misdemeanor from others. So they're the people that jump to worst case scenario all the time. They're building things up in their head of all the things that are going to go wrong before they even do something, because they're wired to expect that. That's what they've experienced in the past. They have a predominantly negative outlook on life. They're very critical of themselves and they're critical of others. However, because they've never had it, they have this deep yearning for connection with others and with themselves, but they fear abandonment and rejection because they may have, they would have experienced abandonment and rejection throughout their childhood. And then they also lack boundaries for themselves and with others. So they're the types of attachment styles, and they're the wounds of each attachment style. So you might find that you fall in a little bit of like one category, two categories, maybe even three. But when the inner child wound is triggered, the subconscious remembers past experiences automatically, and this causes perceived stress. It's what we've taken from our past experience as unsafe, and we then become stressed with the fight-flight mode that becomes activated if we're feeling somewhat hard done by or feeling unsafe because of these wounds being activated and triggering us. So many people go through life not knowing how to recognize these stress symptoms in their body, and they're not aware of how to center themselves physically, and they're also unaware of that their thoughts also contribute to prolonging the stress mode in the body, and the nervous system is responsible for our stress response. So if you're someone who holds a lot of trauma, or even you don't even have to have like big, massive traumatic experiences. Like I said, you could have just been, mum could have just had, mood swings that she wasn't able to meet your needs, and you learnt to just kind of avoid her. That's a trauma, Maybe you wanted a cookie and you got denied a cookie. That as a child is perceived as a trauma. That is a child seeing and thinking, mum doesn't love me, she doesn't want to give me the cookie. Kids make up their own little perceptions from that young age, and that's considered as like a trauma, okay? So many of us go through not knowing how to recognize these symptoms, and that we need to be aware of our thoughts as well. So the nervous system, particularly if you did experience trauma, the nervous system will be on high alert and functioning on high alert constantly. So when you're functioning on high alert constantly, you've got stress hormones that are being sent throughout the body, like cortisol and adrenaline, And this creates inflammation, can cause high blood pressure, issues with your heart. The list goes on in terms of what sort of illnesses you can get from prolonged stress. And this goes into, this then starts to move you into a state of burnout where you are completely deflated mentally, emotionally, and then you start to become physically ill. So there are two main branches of the autonomic nervous system. There's the parasympathetic nervous system, and then there's also the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest mode, which is when you're in a calm state. And then you've got the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fawn just means people pleasing, which is the stress state. So we're just going to go through a couple of the physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, behavioral symptoms, and psychological symptoms so that you can understand that there's different levels or categories of stress. So when you're showing physical symptoms, you can see this as maybe shallow breathing, tension in your muscles, an elevated heart rate, low energy. Emotional symptoms look like difficulty relaxing, feeling overwhelmed, outbursts, mood swings, irritation, anger, snapping, that type of thing. Behavioral symptoms look like things like nail biting, turning to drugs or alcohol, avoiding responsibility, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, not being able to get to sleep. Psychological symptoms look like overthinking and worry, being unable to focus, brain fog, and disorientation. So the fastest way to calm yourself if you are experiencing any of the above is, number one, you kind of need to have the awareness that you are experiencing symptoms of stress and that you are in fight-flight mode. Secondly, we need to activate calmness, and this happens in two parts. So I like to start from the body first and then go to the mind. So the one thing that you can start doing is using your breath to activate the rest and digest mode. Now, the one sort of analogy I like to use is, when you're in a car and you've got the brake and you've got the accelerator. When you're driving, you can't have them both pushed at the same time. So the brake is the rest and digest mode and the accelerator is the fight-flight mode. So to push the brake on your nervous system, you need to start breathing. And breathing quite deeply down into your belly and then up into your lungs. And you keep doing this will sort of, until you sort of feel a state of calm coming over you. This will automatically switch off the fight-flight mode. So remember how I said you can't have one brake on without the other. So as soon as you start applying the brake and breathing deeply, your body will start to turn off the stress response. Once you're sort of doing the whole deep breathing thing down into the belly and up into the chest, you then need to become aware of your thought processes. So any negative thoughts around your perceived stress needs to be replaced with something hopeful. So you start breathing, doing your deep breathing, and then bring your focus to your thought process as you're breathing. And I want you to replace any sort of thought that has been negative or around your perceived stress, that this is what you're going to repeat to yourself, this is only a temporary feeling. What if it all works out? And keep repeating this and breathing deeply and calmly until you feel calm, okay? And your body and your mind will start to then become in sync. Now, if your mind strays back to the triggering thoughts, then you're going to start activating the stress response again in the body. Okay, so it's really important that in that moment you're choosing thoughts that are calming, that are hopeful, that are more positive than focusing on the thoughts that were triggering you. Now, an interesting fact that I wanted to share is that a chemical reaction, okay, so when we're triggered through our senses of what we're seeing, what we're feeling, what we're perceiving and thinking, that will cause a reaction in the body. Whether it makes us angry or makes us scared, The chemical reaction itself only lasts for 90 seconds. So if something's triggering you and you're getting the shits at something, that chemical reaction will only last and it'll disperse after 90 seconds. So any longer than 90 seconds, if you're remaining angry, you're actually choosing to remain in that state by constantly thinking about that situation that's bugged the shit out of you. So anything after 90 seconds, so you need to deep breathe and you need to keep replacing that thought process, that more hopeful thought process, for at least 90 seconds. Because then that automatic reaction is then going to dissipate. And if you stay in that state, you're actually choosing to remain in that state. So that's a little bit of a tip there for you. So the last thing I kind of wanted to go through is, before we finish up, is if you're feeling stuck and you feel overwhelmed, it's basically because you're without a vision of what you want your life to look like. So at the beginning, when I was talking about the why, we need a vision, okay? We need a vision to couple with that why. And that vision needs to have some kind of a goal. And then that goal needs to then have some kind of order in your life with steps that are going to get you to that goal. So the simplest way to reduce overwhelm is to create yourself a little bit of a routine where you can implement time for yourself in terms of your self-care if it's the stress and the burnout that you're wanting to get over. So self-care activities that are going to calm your stress. So things like working out, meditation, eating well, doing yoga, things that are going to sort of calm your nervous system and reduce your stress load. So you need to get organized. So first of all, we need to get clear on the vision. Okay. We need to have a really big emotional why that's going to pull us through the hard times. Then if we create a little bit of a routine with set days and times where you're going to have activities that are going to help you reduce your stress load. And then we're going to have our daily steps that we're going to check off. Okay, and those that can be simple as, what time am I going to go to bed? Because you need enough sleep. What time am I going to wake up in the morning? When am I going to put my self-care activities? Or even just having a routine of like, when you're going to do meal prep, when you're going to do your cleaning, when are you going to do, everything can go in this routine. And then you need steps that are going to be incremental steps that you're going to complete on a daily basis that's going to get you to your goal. So that's pretty much it for this evening. I hope that has been helpful for you. And as I said before, for those of you who have stayed this long, I have a special offer. I'm giving away 10 free strategy calls for those of you who would like help identifying your inner child wounds. And I can also give you a little bit of it's called 7 Simple Steps to Feeling Blissed Out. It is my core strategy in terms of healing the inner child and reparenting the inner child. And also it has lots of tools and techniques that teach you how to reduce your stress load, reparent the inner child. So if this is something that you're interested in, for those of you who are interested, please drop a comment or send me a PM. Like I said, this is normally $297. It goes for 45 minutes. I'm offering 10 strategy calls for completely free for those of you who get in first. So first in, first serve. And again, if you think that there's anybody who will benefit, who's suffering from burnout, who would benefit from this live, or sorry, not live, but this recording, then tag them in there, and hopefully if they get in time, they may even get a free coaching call with me as well. So thank you so much for being patient. Thank you so much for listening, and I would like to say thank you and have a good evening.